Hi there. If you love the tales of tasty tunes, then welcome to the YouTube edition of Hit Story. I'm your host, Tim Tamashiro. On this episode, Bruce Springsteen's Ode to the Road, the Car, and the Girl. This is such a cool story. This is the hit story of Born to Run.
You're listening to Hit Story with Tim Tamashiro.
Hello, welcome to Hit Story. This is the podcast that tells the tales of tasty tunes. And the goal of this podcast is to give you some insight into the songs that you already love. Hopefully these songs will become even more meaningful to you after you hear these stories. Stories tend to change the way you hear songs, you know. I've seen it happen for 25 years. My name is Tim Tamashiro. This edition of Hit Story is all about a New Jersey kid who barely made it through school. He snuck anonymously through life like a ghost. He never really made an impression on the town he lived in, but in his quiet state, he observed and he watched the plight of the hardworking people around him. He was quietly paying attention to their blue-collar existence. They lived the reality of a difficult life, but they still dreamed of freedom. Young Bruce Springsteen may have been unremarkable to begin with, but when he got a guitar and a pencil in his hand, his perfect storm of experience helped him write a masterpiece. This is the hit story of Born to Run. For most people, thinking too hard about writing a song would result in nothing coming out of it at all. Analysis paralysis would set in, and the first step, the most important step, would never begin. But 24-year-old Bruce Springsteen had his hopes high. He wanted to write a great rock and roll classic song, and he thought really hard about this idea for this one epic tune. It would be his shot at the big time. For the first time in his life, he had the fire in his gut to stand out. So he figured the harder he worked on this song, the better it would turn out. He worked on his ode to rock and roll as hard as a railroad worker hammered at spikes. Bruce, you see, had been listening to a lot of music to inspire him. He focused on the raw sounds of the 50s and 60s. He searched for a blueprint for his music. What lifted him the most was the snarling thick strings of an amplified guitar and heavy drum beats that rattled the speakers until they crackled. Only a singer with a throaty growl could earn the respect of real rock and rollers, he thought. So he imagined himself making heroic rock and roll music. He wanted to make music that felt as good as what he felt when he dropped the needle on records from Roy Orbison, Del Shannon, or Phil Spector. To Bruce Springsteen, that was real music. It was crafted by experienced music masters instead of scrawled out by amateurs. Bruce's favorite records had been painstakingly arranged. The musicians on those records were professionals. The engineers at the soundboards used real, tried and true recording techniques. Their skills made those records sound thick and aggressive. They made music that was in your face like a pit bull raging at your head at the end of a heavy chain. Bruce wanted his song to be like those songs. He wanted it to be amazing, but he also wanted it to be a hit. More than anything, he wanted to prove that he had what it takes to be a badass rock and roll star. So in the early months of 1974, Bruce sat on the edge of his ratty old bed in his upstairs room in New Jersey. He picked up his electric guitar, and he strummed away at some power chords, searching for a riff. The riff, he figured, that would be his starting point. Once he had that, he could hang his lyrics on it. And then, as if out of nowhere, he landed on a riff that sounded really cool. And it came with a phrase. It was, "Tramps like us, baby, we were born to run." Bruce had no idea where this phrase "born to run" came from. It just kind of popped into his head. Maybe he had seen it written someplace before, maybe on a movie poster or written in the hand-painted lettering of a race car. All he knew was that "Born to Run" was destined to be the title of this song. Bruce also knew from his past songwriting experience that he needed to focus on some kind of a story, and the story needed to be both about nobody in particular and everybody at the same time. In other words, this song needed to be universal. He wanted clarity for this tune, so he began to answer questions about the characters and the setting and the conflict that they would face. So who was born to run? Why are we tramps? Who is this boy and the girl? For the answers, he looked to his upbringing in New Jersey and the realities that the people experienced around him. He funneled his story into something that he was very familiar with. So Bruce decided that his song was going to be about three things: the road, the car, and the girl. That's it. He figured that the essence of rock and roll really just boiled down to those three things. Born to Run, he decided, would be about the real lives of the hard-working, blue-collar workers that he saw out there in the neighborhood every day. Born to Run sure wasn't an easy tune to write. Bruce slaved over that song for 6 months. He hammered away at it, and he polished it until it gleamed. If this song was going to be his shot at the big time, then every single word better taste amazing when it came out of his mouth. He had to make damn good and sure that every lyric of that song would work forever. And finally, after overhauls and tinkering, steps forward and slips back, Bruce was satisfied. His song had the imagery of sweat and dreams, the girl, the boy, death traps, sadness, madness, and then walking in the sun. And best of all, his song was about every single person who would ever hear that song. You know who they are. Tramps like us. Now, how in the hell do you record a song that epic? You're listening to Hit Story, and I really hope you're enjoying it so far. My name is Tim Tamashiro, and this Hit Story podcast is really part of what I love to do. It's part of my ikigai. It's the Japanese map for creating a meaningful life. Here's the best part. Everybody has an ikigai. To find yours, all you have to do is figure these things out. You got to do what you love, do what you're good at, do what the world needs, and then find ways that you can be paid for your gifts. That's ikigai. If you'd like to see Ikigai hard at work, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's called Tim Tamashiro, More Meaningful Me. Just search that up on YouTube and you hit that subscribe button. Now, how did Bruce Springsteen and his band record a song that he imagined in his head sounding like a rocket engine? In 1974, recording technology was just in its teens. Studios were analog, and they used reel-to-reel tape recorders. Recording engineers were bound by the technology available at that time. Multi-track recording was limited to just 16 tracks at a time in many cases. Now, 16 tracks of recording was cutting-edge stuff at that time, but Bruce pictured Born to Run as a song that would require way more tracks than just 16. If he was going to get the loud sound of a live rock concert at a rocket launch, then he needed every bit of recording trickery and science at his disposal. Bruce and the E Street Band moved into 914 Sound Studios. It was located in a little town north of New York City called Blauvelt. The plan was to go there to record his masterpiece, and the rest of the album would follow eventually. So Bruce and the team got to work. They recorded layer upon layer of drums and guitar sounds. Each time they laid down another instrument track, the sound became more like the rumble of a dragster with straight pipes blasting top fuel out of the engine. Bruce had dreamed for months for a fat sound like that, and at times the whole thing sounded like a cacophony. Recording and mixing was a complicated business in the 1970s. Everything at the soundboard was done by hand. So when it came time to mix Born to Run, the engineer at the studio would take up his position at the board with his fingers on sliders for maybe guitars and drums. Another band member would be in charge of levels for vocals and keys. Bruce, on the other hand, would stand over top of the whole operation, and he'd be prepared to jump to a slider to crank up a track if he thought it was necessary. They would need to mix the song with each person choreographed from the start of the song right to the very end. There was no stopping. A mix had to be a mix from beginning to end. It would have to be executed flawlessly for Bruce to sign off on it. They did take after take, and then they tried it again. Eventually, Bruce and the whole band finally got the sound they wanted. Bruce took a copy home with him that night to sleep on. In the morning, he woke up and he listened to a song with fresh ears. What he heard was a miracle. He heard music that sounded like the jet engine of a 747 wrapped around a set of lyrics that punched and kicked to be heard. The guitars gnashed their teeth. The drums pounded like the hooves of 10,000 buffalo. And best of all, the story of the hard-working hero cut through. It was the song of the everyman, sweating it out on the streets of a runaway American dream. It was exactly what he had imagined all those months ago when he sat on the corner of his bed. The mucky mucks at CBS Records who had signed Bruce Springsteen had a million opinions about Born to Run. They complained that there was too much happening on the recording. They thought the whole thing needed to be redone. The vocals were just too buried. They listened to the song with their record weasel ears, not with the ears of somebody who had lived that song. Bruce did live that song. He'd put his heart and his soul into it for 6 grueling months. He knew what he wanted, and he got exactly what he had planned for. He got his 747 jet engine. And he hoped that millions of people could play that song in their living room or blast it on their car radio. There was nothing that those record weasels could say to him to make him change his mind. Born to Run was released to a handful of select FM radio stations before the rest of the album was even written. It immediately became a cult favorite. And more importantly, Born to Run earned Bruce Springsteen the first rung on the rock and roll superstar ladder. In Cleveland, Ohio, radio jockey Kid Leo began a tradition that spoke to the hearts of the men and women who Bruce's song was all about. On Friday afternoons at precisely 5:55 p.m., Kid Leo would take to the mic to sign off for the weekend. After waiting all week, he would spin the song of the people. He would play Born to Run for everyone who had been sprung from their cages after having the bones ripped from their backs all week. You were free to have your dreams and your visions with your weekend off. You could break this trap and never go back, even if it was just for one night. On Friday, Kid Leo helped his listeners walk into the sun. Because, baby, we were born to run. My name is Tim Tamashiro. Thank you so much for listening. Now go dig up a copy of Born to Run and listen to it from beginning to end. Listen to Born to Run and have your hit story hallelujah. Thank you so much for listening to Hit Story. If you enjoyed yourself, you can subscribe to the podcast and get a brand new hit story every Saturday until I run out of songs. And if you are passionate about this podcast, you can become a patron of Hit Story by offering a small financial stipend at my Patreon page. Patreon allows supporters like you to provide financial support, $3, $5, maybe $10 at a time for quality content. If you love Hit Story, then support it. And that will keep the lights on and the refrigerator cold and my faithful dog named Macaroni with treats so that I can write and produce and record this podcast. Go ahead and check out other episodes of Hit Story. I'm Tim Tamashiro.